Hello there, everyone. My name is David Berthold, and I'm the Director in Residence at NIDA. And in conversation, we're going to be speaking with Kate Champion. I'm speaking from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and which has been a place of community and storytelling and culture for about 3,000 generations now. This was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and those coming into leadership now. Kate, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm also Gadigal land.
Great. Kate is a director and choreographer across theatre, dance, opera, musical theatre, circus. And quite notably founded the very influential dance theatre company Force Majeure and led it for about 13 years between 2002 and 2015. And Kate has also just directed a show at NIDA, which closed just a week or so ago, Hilary Bell's play called Perfect Stranger. Kate, we might just chat a little bit about that straight up. So it's a play that you'd actually wanted to do for a little while, hadn't you?
Yeah, look, I think I read it about 4 or 5 years ago through, I think Hilary had given it to Griffin, or she'd also sent it to me directly. And I was fascinated by it. It just felt like it was a fresh form and a great challenge. And I actually, but it had been given to quite a few theatre companies, and they found the prospect of it too daunting with over 30 characters, 30 scenes, etc. So how do you stage that? And I wondered myself, and my first inclination was to make it site specific, where the audience would travel with the main character and you take it all around, you know, Darlinghurst and end up at St Vincent's Hospital. But that undertaking wasn't going to be, no one was ready for that either. So it kind of put it in a drawer. I also did do a development with Barangaroo on an amazing, huge installation where we took Hilary's play as a springboard, but that piece never got up either. Yep. So it stuck with me for a long time. And then when you contacted me, because Hilary said, you know, maybe an institute who has access to more student, you know, more people, and it's sometimes those things are weirdly more possible within an institute, and so that stuck with me. And yeah, the rest is history. So
well, it wasn't a play I was familiar with. I know Hilary quite well, but that play I didn't know, and it's probably one of her very best plays from my point of view. Like a really fascinating, perfectly structured, really insightfully written piece of, I guess you could almost be tempted to call it a magical realism in a way. It sort of verges on that. Certainly has a mystery at its heart. And but you staged it, I thought, in a tremendously interesting way, with a difficult play to find a design solution for. Tell us how you produced it.
Well, I met with Hayden and Ralph and Hannah Taylor. Hayden, the set designer, and Hannah costumes, and we tossed around the idea of whether it could be traversed, so that when the audience is looking down one end, you're fixing up the next scene down the other, and we do a bit of a tennis match. And even that felt a little bit clunky. And then Hayden did mention that he'd investigated whether a revolve was available, but he was thinking to put the set on the revolve. And obviously that could have been one solution. And then I remembered Hilary talking about a performance she went to, a fringe performance in New York, where the audience were all put on swivel chairs. And somehow within our conversation about the revolve and the swivel chairs, we went, what about we put the audience on the revolve? And it was like, yes, it blew my mind. It just, because it's got quite a filmic quality to me, the script. And so to have a panning shot, one continual panning shot, or whichever way you wanted to go, and the ability to change things out of sight of the audience was just incredible. And then to go to NIDA and find out that the design department was up for that, and everyone else involved who needs to give permission for that, would go ahead, because I think with a lot of traditional theatres, possibly they wouldn't go for it because of the amount of people you can sit on a revolve and the cost involved.
Yeah.
But also we put it in more or less in a cupboard, which is incredibly exciting too for the proximity. And it was just, that was the most amazing thing. Was cracking the solution to staging it.
It was an amazing way for the audience, you know, sitting there as an audience member on that revolve, and that first moment when the revolve moved and you realized that the audience was moving, your sense of time and place got completely confounded. And as you say, it was just like one long tracking shot or panning shot in film.
And Hayden managed to make so many false walls of brick walls that you just thought were the walls of the theatre.
Totally.
And solving all those things, like where stage management calls the show from behind a wall on a screen or 4 screens.
Yeah.
But one of my favourite moments is exactly what you're talking about. It was, I think, a preview, and the revolve started to move and a woman went, "What's happening?" And then I found out she'd never been in a theatre before, because she was one of the actors' aunt. And so now we were laughing about the fact that when she next goes to the theatre, she'll be wondering why it's so stationary.
Right, the theatre's always like that. Right.
Yeah.
Great. Anyway, that was a great pleasure to have you directing at NIDA, I must say. And yeah, I know.
I think what you're talking about too, the disorientating factor of it, which is put you in the protagonist's mindset as well, where it's familiar but completely, you can't pin yourself to anything that helps you know where you are or where she was in her life. So those two things became a visceral experience for the audience as well.
Well, it's a great marriage of kind of, you know, form and content in that way, I suppose, you know, because the lead character has lost sense of time and place as well. So to kind of have that reflected in the way, you know, the show was physically produced, I thought was just a perfect solution, really.
To get everyone on board, everyone's enthusiasm to understand how the sets, how many people needed to be behind that seating block to quietly move things into place, for the actors to understand that they were on for a minute, 2 minutes if they were lucky, and off and changing, and to understand, you know, as opposed to roles where you have a lot of time to get into the layers and depth of it. But they brought all their enthusiasm to it, which was really necessary. If everyone involved was unenthusiastic, it couldn't have happened.
Yeah, it was great. So I want to dig a little into your career. So that, you know, Hillary's Play is a play, but you have an incredibly varied career as a director and choreographer, you know, across opera, musical, circus, solo shows. You know, a couple of years ago, you directed Arthur Miller's View from a Bridge. So you're in all sorts of kind of performing arts.
Yeah.
But it strikes me that there are some very defining lines in the work that you've directed or created from the very beginning. And I want to take you back to the very beginning, to when you were 6 years old, growing up in the Northern Beaches, and you had some rather unusual dance lessons, didn't you?
Yes, I had a dance teacher, Karen Kokoven, who my sister would have been 4 and I was probably 6, and Karen was only 19, and she'd occupied this studio behind a petrol station in Newport. And I don't know how my mother found it, but she did. But she was the daughter of an Dutch abstract painter. Her mother was an abstract painter. And she just brought such creativity to how she taught. So the technique wasn't the emphasis. It was, we did choreography. We created little dances. We learned the structure of music, more so than how to point our feet possibly and straighten our knees. It wasn't the main goal. But a real breakthrough for me, I think, was when I was about 12 or 13. And for family reasons, we'd had to go to therapy, and the therapist had asked us as family members to put each of us in a position in the room as to how we related to each other. So, you know, you could put your parents back to back and your sister over in the corner. And anyway, I came to my dance lessons and Karen said, "How did you go?" Because she was very sensitive to things that were going on in her students' lives as well. And I said, "Oh, we did this thing." And I described it to her. And then when we had class that afternoon, she made it something we made into dance. So we used that task and used people in the room and made them our family members and put them in proximity, far or close. And then we had to make them move as well. And I don't know, it was just this incredible moment for me of taking something quite traumatic and making it creative and a window into other children's lives that I didn't know. And it's just this incredible shared humanity that I think too, because I didn't have a religious upbringing, just opened a window to me about, you know, the sense of being human.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, a lot of young people, particularly young girls, when they're very young, you know, in suburbs and places around Australia have, you know, ballet lessons or dance classes. But the way you've described it, that's a very different way of being introduced to dance. Like,
yeah, she definitely taught ballet, and we did technique, and I did Cicchetti exams, and
right.
I did aspire to get into the Australian Ballet at one point, but, you know, there's no way with my physique that was going to happen, or my ability. So, but, you know, there was that, and I did wear point shoes and a tutu and things. In fact, I still have the results of a ballet exam where they were running late. So I went out the back and tried practicing all my turns, and I didn't realize I was in a muddy part so I got mud all over my pink tights and my hair was all over the place. And the only result of the ballet exam was more care with appearance would lead to more rewarding result.
Right.
So the artificiality of how you look was still, you know, a factor.
Right. Okay. Good. Yeah. I mean, the other extraordinary thing about your young life, you know, before you'd even reached 20, was going off and living in Munich. When I think initially at 14 and again at 16 or something like that, like living there and training as a dancer.
Yeah, 14 was with my parents, a long story, but I didn't go to school, and my mother found this incredibly, I'll call it psychedelic. Every wall had a different color. It had 8 studios. It had people coming from New York and London to teach. I got a scholarship. I just danced all day. I went out clubbing with them at night at some ridiculous, you know, 14, 13. Anyway, they said they would start a dance company and I should stay there, but my parents wouldn't let me. I was too young. So I went back to Australia, but when I was just turned 16, they contacted me and said they'd started the company. Would I come and join it? They pay my airfare and I could live in the school. And so 2 weeks after my 16th birthday, I went and joined this dance company in Munich.
I mean, amazing. So kind of formal education as we know it in Australia seems to have kind of, you know, really taken a backseat. And there you were essentially on your own in Germany, in Munich, at 16, just having turned 16. Who were you living with? Like what kind of education were you having?
Life education.
Life. Going to clubs at night time.
Yeah, lots of clubs. And look, no, my mother was still, you know, I think other parents might have given her a hard time. She was still apologizing till late in her life for letting me go at such a young age. But I also think I threatened them that if they didn't let me go, I would, for the rest of my life, remind them that I could have had a career in the arts or been a dancer if they hadn't let me go. Yeah. But the couple who ran the company were my guardians. Right. But that was a pretty loose term. But there were a lot of people in the company that looked out for me. And I didn't, my education didn't continue. I used to have quite a chip on my shoulder, not chip on my shoulder. I used to really cover up my lack of education, especially as my father was an academic. He was a professor of psychology at Sydney Uni. I mean, maybe that's why, you know, my brother and I went into the arts. I don't know, seeing the kind of life that an academic has. But I always thought I'll take these opportunities which will never come again other than at this age, and then I can always study later in life, and that just hasn't happened. But I did have a very limited education formally. But a wonderful life. Look, when I spent a year in Munich, I came back, I did better in English at school than I had before. There are things that, you know.
What kind of dance was it?
It was a mixture of contemporary, it was a contemporary dance company. It even did jazz. I taught a lot there. It was a bit of child labor going on. I taught disco lessons to German housewives. Because it was.
Do you have videos of that?
No, because I'd be bribed and blackmailed for a lot of money. Because it was the era of Saturday Night Fever, and so that was all the. But my German was quite limited as well, so it was very funny sometimes the things I'd say and the reaction I'd get from the people having the lesson.
Wow.
And I also at that time, you know, I mean, it was a crossroads of incredible things going on. And I know you know this, but that's when I had the opportunity to tour with the Police before they were famous, because they were looking for a dancer to be part of a concert. So I had this amazing experience at that age.
Yeah. So I think you heard Roxanne before pretty much anyone else.
I think I did. It was in a brick factory when the laser beam had broken down and we were waiting for it to be fixed, because it was a all sensory performance of smell and slides and laser. Laser hadn't been used much at all. And anyway, we were all waiting for it to be fixed. And I went wandering around the warehouses and I just heard the strains of Roxanne and opened the door and there was Sting on his own in this massive warehouse singing it.
Right. And that was before they'd done the recording.
It was before the record had been released. They'd recorded it.
Right. Okay. Right. Well, that's pretty good.
Hmm.
And then you, interestingly, when you finally got back to Australia, I guess in a way you began developing a career as a dancer in contemporary dance, I guess in 3 companies in particular, with Kaita Chan's One Extra company here in Sydney. But also I think a founding member in Dance North up in Townsville, which is still going strong. And then at the Australian Dance Theatre in Adelaide. So all over the country, but you know, they were all kind of quite big experiences, I imagine. But I guess that was the beginning of what you could say would be a standard career in dance, I suppose, in a way, as a contemporary dancer.
Yes, I guess so. The thing about if you're interested in dance theatre and making dance theatre, there's hardly anyone who hasn't been a dancer who creates dance theatre or ends up directing dance theatre. There are a lot of directors in theatre that haven't been actors, but it becomes your apprenticeship. If you're interested in making work, devising work in that form, the pathway then was to get in the room as a dancer and learn from the people who ran the company. So it was I was on that trajectory, because Keitai was particularly much more a dance theatre medium, and mixing words and making coherent narrative through with dance as a very prominent element of it. Dance North, I'd done a show with my brother who'd been in Circus Oz and he'd left, and Cheryl Stock and Paul Charlier and a stuntman, and it was pre-Legs on the Wall, and it was making circus, dance, theatre in a coherent narrative. And it was on at the Seymour Centre. It was called Suspense, and I did a trapeze act with my brother. Even though I was terrified of heights, I ended up still doing that. So it was through that experience that I got to know Cheryl Stock, and she was the new artistic director of what was the North Queensland Ballet Company, which became Dance North. So she then asked me to come up with her and be one of the dancers in that company. And then I think, you know, as an aspiring dancer, to be in a major dance company like the Australian Dance Theatre is this kind of something you want to have achieved. You work so hard to you know, with the tool of your body to achieve that. And especially I think because I always felt I hadn't had proper technical training. It was something I just really wanted to prove to myself. So when Lee Warren became director of Australian Dance Theatre, he was actually looking for dancers who were interested in choreography. Right. And he knew that, and so that was through that. So I feel like I had a very long apprenticeship that went on longer than we talked about, trying to learn about how I wanted to make work. And I had to be a dancer to do that.
No, that makes sense. And I guess it goes back to those early kind of experiences in Newport when you were 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, and the kind of dance theatre that you were making there, kind of based on psychological tasks, you know, from very earliest experiences of dance.
Now, most people have that experience from a Pina Bausch lineage.
Yeah, right. Yours is
it's
different.
meant to be the mother of that task-based thing. But yeah, mine was in a petrol station in Newport.
Newport. Because it's the same principle, isn't it? I mean, it is Pina Bausch technique. It's just, it's the same idea.
It's kind of famous for 6 ways to do something. Yeah. And there's a lot of thinking behind why it's, but similar,
Yeah. And considering that lineage, because there are very direct lineages from Pina Bausch in Australia, particularly
There
through
are, yeah.
and others. And it's interesting, it's a bigger conversation, but the lineages of dance theatre in Australia are really fascinating. And I guess another part of your lineage, you know, moving from a career as a dancer to a dance theatre maker, let's say, I guess a really important experience for you was encountering DV8. Let's talk a little bit about that with Lloyd Newsom.
I'd become aware of his work when I was at the Australian Dance Theatre, because Douglas Wright came to do a work on Australian Dance Theatre, and he was in Dead Dreams of Monochrome Men, and I was blown away by that. And working with Douglas was just incredible, because the way he engaged your mind and your creative contribution was what I was thirsty for, hungry for. Often in dance, in more traditional dance, your opinion's not sought. And I think dancers are incredible beings, and particularly ones that achieve a high level of technique and expertise. But you can start to feel like you're paint squeezed out of a tube, because often you don't know what the piece is about, and it's something more ephemeral. And yeah, it was just that I felt my intellect wasn't, and your voice isn't heard. So I left Australian Dance Theatre, having been aware of DV8, and wanted very much to get involved with film. I felt like I could easily name 5 films that year that had, you know, really affected my life, but I couldn't name 5 dance pieces. So that pathway didn't happen easily. I met someone who became a director by being a secretary at the ABC. So next thing I knew, I enrolled in a temp agency and ended up at an insurance company handling hail damage claims for cars, and realised I'd taken a wrong turn. I got a call from Kim Carpenter to be in a piece about Lloyd Rees as a performer. So I thought, I'll go back to performing until I can work out how to get back on track. Went to Melbourne. Dear friend Chad Courtney and I smuggled our way into a dress run of DV8s, which we weren't meant to be at. And it was called If Only. And I just thought, this is everything. This is narrative. This is movement. This is like film effects on stage, and so many of the things I was interested in, still with a dance-related language at its heart, or movement, I should say, really. And movement, not meaningless, like always conveying something. So basically I spent a long time, I met Lloyd, and then eventually got a grant to go to London. And that was wasn't an easy path, but I eventually ended up being a production assistant on his production of Strange Fish. And everyone felt terribly sorry for me back here, because they thought, oh, she's not performing, she's probably making cups of tea and cleaning the floor. But what was amazing for me was I was on the outside and I could understand all the decisions he was making. I feel like when you're in a work as a performer, you often can't help but have an egocentric point of view. So if something you've been working on hard gets cut, you take it very personally. Whereas I could see from the outside, no, that makes sense. Or I could see, you know, and I got to know Lloyd more, and I felt incredibly privileged to be able to be on the outside. And then one of the dancers had to leave the work, and I got cast in it eventually anyway. And thereafter then proceeded a long learning and incredible engagement with DV8 through the 90s, and with Lloyd to this day, and Wendy Houston.
Yeah, like that's an amazing apprenticeship. And DV8, you know, one of the most influential dance theatre companies on the planet for a very long time, until very, very recently, actually, when Lloyd wound up the company just a handful of years ago. Can you describe some of that work, like the way that Lloyd Newsom kind of made work? Like what did you learn at that time about what was possible in dance theatre?
Look, just that to make work from him, I've learned the level of rigor of inquiry just has to be just so full on, and everyone needs to rise to that level of engagement. And so Lloyd asks a lot from the people he works with, but he asks as much, if not more, I'd say more, from himself. And just you know, not taking anything that's just okay. It has to really try so many different approaches to something, both improvised and from others' ways of creating work, and testing it against whether it is conveying what's needing to be said, whether it's adding up to it all. So the intellectual, the meaning, he's always talks about connecting movement to meaning. So never anything extraneous, never anything that's decorative for its own sake. So it's the rigor of the investigation and the commitment to doing quite really full-on set design that is appropriate to the thematic of the work, and being unrelenting and continuing to work on it even past its opening date. And the way you are called upon to be an actor, even if words aren't necessarily used, although he started using text around the same time I did when I came back and was doing work with Force Majeure. So a lot of the work has gone into text, but what I experienced with him was less so. I would say it's the rigor and the just not settling for it until it's absolutely what needs to be said. There's no halfway, there's no 7/8 of the way. It has to be exactly right, and a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of research and a lot of discussion and a lot of blood, sweat and tears, I'd say. I mean, it's the hardest thing I've ever done was working with DV8 as far as a performer, my experience as a performer goes.
Wow. And after that experience, you came back to Australia, picked up a Robert Helpman scholarship for your first solo work called Face Value, and you picked up a number of awards for that. So, you know, you got off to a really good start back in Australia. And then a couple of years after that, a second solo show called About Face. I guess what drew you to making solo works for yourself? What kind of works were they?
Look, I think it was Wendy Houston actually said this, but that everyone who wants to direct or make work on other people in this form, you have so much more authority if you've put yourself through everything that you're going to then ask of your performers. So even though I was actually getting to a point where I didn't want to be looked at on stage, I didn't want to be performed anymore, but simultaneously I was making a solo show, which was incredibly contradictory. But it was really that I had come back from DV8, applied to try and direct group work, and was very unsuccessful for quite a while. I was getting close to, you know, I was in my late 30s, and I thought the feedback I was getting was, we know what work you've done with other people, but we don't know what your work is. And this is a conundrum for artists that give a lot in a collaborative process. And I know quite a few who I know have contributed to the aesthetic of other people's work. And then when they go solo, it's like their work is like the company that they've just left. So anyway, I was having trouble getting support, and they said, so I thought, if I make a solo show and I write it, direct it and perform in it, then even if it fails gloriously, I can say that's the work that I want to do. And so that was the reason for why I wanted to do it.
They succeeded gloriously is what happened. You know, they were quite famous at the time, and, you know, a number of
it was a good risk, and I learned a lot. I made my second show in a scout hall in Austinmere. The first one was in a warehouse in Marrickville. And I have a lot of memories of being there on my own, just torturing myself, because often as a dancer, your body is imbued with, or coded with, other people that you've worked with. So it has a muscle memory. And when you go to do things, you go, oh, I can't do that. That's like Lee Warren. That's like Cheryl Stocker. That's probably like DV8. I've got to, and it's just, you have to just go through so much to try and find what you hope is an original voice and an original gesture.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you made it, and just after that second solo show, you know, you set up your own company, you know, to make more substantial work with other performers. You know,
when you say set up a company, all it was a name.
Right, good.
It wasn't anything more than that.
Okay.
People think you have a studio and people working for you. It was just a name.
Yeah, yeah.
It was because I didn't want to be Kate Champion and dancers, and I wanted to acknowledge the input of the people that I work with. So anything with my name wouldn't have done that.
Right. And the first show under that name, Force Majeure, was Same But Different, which I think was with Sydney Festival, if I'm right.
Yes. And Melbourne, and ended up going to Brisbane as well.
Yeah, the festivals and the Force Majeure work actually supported a lot by Sydney Festival and a number of the other festivals over those years.
Yeah.
That first work under this Force Majeure banner was really successful. Like, it really kind of, hit its mark.
Yeah, I think for an independent company doing a premiere work, I think 10,000 people saw it, and we did a return season at the Opera House, and as I said, Melbourne and Brisbane as well. But David, after that, I couldn't get a grant. I couldn't get.
And why do you think that was? I'm aware of that it's sort of, despite the indisputable success of that work, across 3 or 4 cities, big audiences, reviews. What?
I don't know. Look, I empathise with anyone who's going through that now. It's so hard to not take that. Well, I couldn't understand it. And to tell you the truth, I made appointments with everyone on the board that I could to try and have a personal conversation with, understanding what it was. But it was very hard to get to the bottom of.
Yeah.
Who knows? You wonder sometimes if people think you're going okay and that you don't need the support. I don't know. All I know is that in despair, we then applied to dance and theatre in state and federal, 4 different grants in 2 different forms. Right. And 3 years later, we got all 4 of them. So you have to have tenacity, and you have to believe, and if you have had success, you just have to keep applying. But I wish I could answer that, but it didn't stop us.
Yeah. Well, the story ends well, and we'll get to Force Majeure in a moment. But when you were in that kind of period when you couldn't get a grant, couldn't get other work up after the big success of Same but Different, you got a phone call from someone saying, "Hey, would you like to choreograph the international stage musical version of Dirty Dancing?" And
my response was, "You've got the wrong person."
The wrong Kate Champion.
Yeah, well, you got the wrong person. I think I was 40. I said I hadn't got to 40 and not worked in musicals for no reason. And for some reason that made them, they said, "Oh no, we've spent so much time tracking you down. You don't have an agent. You're not in the phone book," as it was then. "Please at least come in for an interview. The woman who originally wrote Dirty Dancing would really like to meet you." So I thought I should at least do them the courtesy of going in and explaining firsthand why I wasn't the right person for the job.
Right. So you were determined to talk yourself out of it.
Well, no, it just wasn't something. I can't tell you, after the type of work like DV8, you don't turn around and do a commercial musical. Yeah. It's like, it just felt to me like recreating something that I couldn't work out where my creative juices could be fulfilled in doing that.
But you did do it.
I did.
And yeah.
It seems like the more I said to Eleanor and everyone in the room the way I worked, the more she purposefully wanted to find more theatre people than the usual suspects.
Right.
So that I didn't realise, but that obviously went in my favour. I always remember describing to her a performance I'd seen of a tango Argentina in New York, and how much I loved that the fatter the man or couple that came on, the kind of better they were at the tango, and how I love body diversity on stage, and I want people to look real, and I wouldn't do unison unless there was a reason for it, and all these things which I thought would certainly put me out of the qualifying, but she found that.
Were you able to bring some of your methodologies into Dirty Dancing? Absolutely,
and that was interesting on a commercial level because it's all about money and who owns what creativity, but I was very open that I felt that the best way was to work collaboratively with the dancers to create the moves. But as the producer said to me, you don't just put all those people in a room and shut the door and you come out with a musical, because how you arrange whose moves to take and diplomatically whose moves not to, and how you then make it spatially work, obviously has to come from me. And then one performer said to me, I don't create, you need to show me what I do. 5, 6, 7, 8, show me what to do. And so, I had to cover all the bases.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm very glad I did it in the end, because and I think it's part of when you read my CV, when you describe my CV, and it's something that I've done more recently by leaving Force Majeure. I'm just always interested in if I can take a fish out of water, if I can take myself out of my comfort zone and go into a completely different world, like I have done with opera or commercial work, and just see whether your skills still hold up is a really fascinating experience to me.
Yeah.
And something that is akin to the creative, you know, initiating creative spirit.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the creative spirit through your work with Force Majeure over those 13 years that you led the company, through a huge variety of work. But I guess there were kind of common principles across all of that work at Force Majeure. You know, many of those works were performed by untrained performers, you know, by people who didn't think of themselves as performers. The very elderly, the disabled, work with a fat activist, people speaking. So I think in most of those shows at Force Majeure had text.
Well, every show had half the cast were actors up until
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and lots of social research. You know, I think what show was it where you went around and did all the research yourself on the phone?
Yeah, the age I'm in, I got a market research firm to find me people, because we initially were interested in interviewing friends of friends of friends, but then you realize as artists, we've all, you know, you don't find very rich people, you often don't find very deeply religious people, you don't find homophobic or racist, or, you know, you tend not to. So I realized we needed to go wider, and I got a market research firm to cold call people, and I would go around to these people's homes with my Zoom recorder, and in an envelope what was called the incentive, which was $50 cash. And I would, and some, you know, I went at night to some people, men's houses who lived on their own, which it was fine, but now I think retrospectively probably wasn't the safest thing to do. But yeah, and I recorded well over 80 hours of interviews, and then I actually booked myself into a hotel because I lived in a very small apartment with my partner, and I edited all those 45, 50-minute interviews down to about 7 or 8 minutes, and then I subsequently worked with a sound designer to get them down to 2 or 3 minutes. So yeah, it's a long process, but I loved it. And
that text was used verbatim in that way in the show.
Yeah, yeah.
So what was driving that approach? You know, wanting to work with, you know, untrained performers and different types of bodies and lots of research.
I think it's that thing, and it stems from a lot of things that I experienced with DVA, because Lloyd worked with, you know, I remember there was a 79-year-old woman, a singer, like a quite wide range. And it's just, if you are trying to express humanity, you need more than everyone to be in their early 20s and perfectly fit and healthy and from a similar background. So it's really about authenticity and having the lived experience to be able to be genuine about what you're portraying. So yeah, rather than being in an arts bubble, I think, which we can tend to exist in, it was about so much wanting people to be able to come to the show who weren't dance theatre aficionados, or let alone especially not dance aficionados, and go, I can see myself up on stage, or my brother, or my next door neighbour. And just, yeah, I mean, it's not that we're not real people, but it's about real, you know, stories. And everyone has such amazing stories. And I went one morning, 9 o'clock, and this woman ended up in tears, third question in. And I realized how much more frank and open sometimes people can be towards a stranger rather than someone that they know. Right. Because I would leave their home and there'd be no consequences. Right. So it was this 45 minutes of intimacy in some ways. And the questions I asked were quite broad ranging, so it allowed them to steer it where they needed to. Mm. But I must say, not everyone was interesting. Sometimes people would would be incredibly tedious, but also sometimes people would have a way of describing something that wasn't necessarily interesting, but their voice or their turn of phrase was so amazing. And other people would have fascinating stories, but they would tell it in a really uninteresting way. So that was where how we use that theatrically became a big question.
Was there a Force Majeure that you think kind of most wonderfully encapsulated your approach to making performance?
Look, there was something about the age I'm in that was an absolute breakthrough, because we had 10 performers, as you say, ranging from 13 to 80. We had Dan, who had cerebral palsy, but we also pioneered this technology, which was basically the iPad before the iPad was invented. And we had these screens because we were also always a bit allergic to we use projection a lot in different ways, and we wanted it to be human scale friendly rather than massive projections behind performers that often tends to pull focus. We thought, how can we do something that's human scale? And so a screen that was the size of a face seemed like a really great way to go. But originally we had them with almost pipes of tubing that were like people who deep sea dive in the 200 years ago, whatever. They were very clunky, and eventually over the years we ended up with them wireless, and the cueing of those images and the animation and the interaction, along with the subject matter of the verbatim interviews, the diverse cast and that technology. I just think so many brave choices and persevering with those came together. So you can't almost label it as what it is. It's an intriguing multi-art performance.
Completely. I think probably all of your shows, I think at Force Majeure, used screens in one way or another, whether it was kind of, am I right in saying that?
There was one called Not in a Million Years we didn't, which right. we performed in thigh-deep polystyrene. But yes, pretty much everything had projection, but not Nothing to Lose, the final work. Right. In the end, it became, I don't know, we decided to give that as a restriction to not use it because we'd done so much with it.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
And after 13 years, in 2005, I think it was, you decided to leave Force Majeure. The company, of course, still exists now.
2015, yeah.
15, sorry, rather. Yeah. So just a few years ago. So it was a long stint there, though. You must be very proud of that work.
It's the thing I'm most proud of. But as I say, it was just a name to start with. So we were project funded. We had to go from project to annual to emerging to key org. Like, it was a long trajectory. And I think it was only a full-time position probably from about 2008 or 9, and only me and one other part-time. So because you grow it so slowly, it's not the same as doing 13 years full-time. I mean, my commitment to it was full-time. No, I'm deeply proud of it, and it was what it's a lifelong dream I held to do that. It's just that the thing that you create to enable your work to go further. So a lot of people who tour work were dubious about conversations with us because they weren't sure we were going to exist longer than a year. So all these reasons for starting a company to help the work have a further life and continue. But then that very thing sometimes becomes not a cage, it's not the right word, but something that was feeding you becomes something you need to feed. Because the more it becomes an entity, the more I felt a desire to also spread that amongst the community, to try and make positions for up and coming dance theatre practitioners and workshops. But also my nature is to work in so many different forms. And it was called a dance theatre company based in Sydney. And if I wanted to do a fashion parade or an installation or a film, it was harder and harder to do that. So I felt restricted in that way, but I also felt like I'd squeezed the form of dance theatre as much as I possibly could, and that we were beginning to be known for that style of work. And I just felt that there was another challenge for me out there. Otherwise, that's what I would do for the rest of my career. And I also will add that I think making works from scratch is incredibly, incredibly demanding. And I just wanted a rest from sleepless nights of wondering how I was going to start or finish a piece and how I was going to fix it. And it takes a lot of your life.
Yeah.
To make work from scratch.
Yeah, let's touch on a couple of other forms for a moment that you mentioned there. We spoke about Dirty Dancing, so we might as well talk about the ring cycle on the other end of things. In 2013, a couple of years before you finished up with Force Majeure, you were the Associate Director of Opera Strada's production of the full ring cycle, all 16 hours of it.
Yeah.
Over 4 nights, directed by Neil Armfield. So can you say a little bit about that? Like what were you bringing to the production?
Well, look, I've worked with Neil. I think I first worked with him in '87 on a youth opera called Frankie in Adelaide. And we worked on Cloudstreet together and various other things. So, and he's a friend, and he contacted me about this, and I was very unsure. And also choreography for opera, this is funny. It often involves moving large crowds around and furniture. You often are the person who needs to help that go on and off. And I wasn't really interested in that. But so Neil created this possibility to be associate director, which was a more creatively challenging position to be involved with. But I wasn't sure about it, but everyone I spoke to said, ring cycle, you have to, everyone needs to do one ring cycle in their life. And I'm very glad to have been introduced to it and to have had the experience. And Neil and the team, Bob Cousins, the designer, Alice Babbage, wanted it very much to be a modern interpretation. And I was just excited about what could be possible when something's been done so often, how you can possibly bring anything new to it. So it was really my devising background. And I did end up working with a massive crowd. I worked with 140 plus volunteers, chorus and volunteers mixed. But it was about evoking physical language with bodies in space more than heavy sets.
Yeah.
As to interpret it. But and just for me, learning how opera like that works and what's involved in putting something like that on, it's fascinating. And then just Wagner and that work itself, how it can be so huge, and you realize how much has referenced that music over you realize all the movie music, and particularly film, I'd say, so many references that I hadn't actually realized had originated with him and that particular work. But it's almost then it pulls down to almost a Pinterest three-hander. So yeah, you learn a lot. And also Wagner was one of the first people to evolve the term Gesamtkunstwerk, which means all artwork. And so in some ways it's very close to my heart, in that I don't care what art form I work in, or what we use to make work, it's whatever's needed. And so the more knowledge I have of every single art form, the more I have at my disposal, and the more of an education in that I have.
Yeah, I hadn't drawn that connection between your own practice and Wagner's, concepts of total theatre, as you say. So yeah, that's a very interesting connection, actually. And I just want to touch briefly on, you've directed a number of plays, particularly in recent years as well. Kind of newish plays, but also, classics with the American theatre, like Arthur Miller's A View from the Bridge. So do you enter a rehearsal room to see something like A View from the Bridge differently, or are you still...
Differently to what I would a devised work?
Yeah.
I bring both. I mean, I think for me, it made a lot of sense, having had text in all of Force Majeure's work and half the cast being actors. It felt like a natural progression to go into directing plays. And I actually think, had I not been at Karen Kerkoven's school when I was 6, I probably would have gone into theatre more formally and purely. So again, and it's also a challenge for me to do that, and to see how my skill base holds up in that environment. And it's interesting, when actors come to work with Force Majeure, they're very open-minded because they've come to work with that form. When I come to work with them in a play, it's a different experience, because they're much more used to being in a traditional room with dissecting a play. So I try and do both. I do the research that's required of a, I guess, for want of a better word, a traditional director, but then I also throw all my devising work at the actors, because I really so much believe that the body in space and every tiny gesture, whether it's an eyeball move, the proximity of someone, the timing of turning away, everything holds such meaning. If you deliver a monologue, you know, with your back to us, at the floor, all these different options are actually a physical, you know, and blocking, I think, has how people are arranged on stage has a massive impact on how a play comes across and how it works. And I also think transitions are vitally important. So I often get someone in who has expertise in contact improvisation, and I get the actors really comfortable with each other's bodies and being able to, and, you know, it plays into intimacy coaching and being able to understand what parameters, how we can touch each other's bodies and what's okay and how we can be comfortable with that. It also creates an incredible sense of ensemble. So when I did go to Adelaide to direct A View from the Bridge, the ensemble that work created of all the task-based work that I do, and particularly in how to work as an ensemble, finding where to be in space. So at one point, after doing a couple of weeks' work, we actually did the whole of A View from the Bridge with the soundscape of Jason Sweeney, with them improvising but not using any of the text. And it was mesmerizing.
Wow. Yeah.
And that was a very special experience, that play, for me.
Yeah. Well, it's a brilliant piece. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And then also I thought, you know, I'm not one, I never expected, I'm not going to direct Chekhov or Shakespeare. So a classic like that was, I just thought, Geordie threw down the gauntlet and I said, why not?
Yeah.
Geordie Brookman, yeah. So I wouldn't have chosen it. And what I've enjoyed with theatre companies is I've been reacting to what they've offered rather than me having to initiate, which I've done for so long.
Yeah. Just finally, before we wind up, Kate, have you ever worked, this is in the theatre area, have you ever worked with a playwright on a new play from the ground up?
Well, my brilliant career is adaptation.
Yeah.
Swallow, the first play directed outside of Force Majeure. Oh no, it wasn't. Wow, have I worked with someone on that? I mean, I've worked with writers on Force Majeure's work, worked with Brendan Cowell on Already Elsewhere, and he wrote all the text. But a play, I'm going to feel like as soon as we finish this, I'm going to remember a play from scratch. Not where I've been the director.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Yeah. In my research, I think that's my answer too. So, but I think
I've worked. Yeah, I've worked with writers on devised work.
Yeah. I think you'd be tremendous at that. Yeah.
Oh no, I have.
Oh.
I have.
What?
Food with Stevie Rogers.
Of course, yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. It was at my theatre. I should have known that.
Yeah. That was such an amazing experience. And we workshop because he had the script, and I said, I don't understand why you're approaching me. And then we did workshops on all the bits that didn't involve text to start with, to know how we could approach it. So he did write the script first, but we did a lot of work together on it. And it was and he co-directed it. Yeah.
Great. And that was a Force Majeure piece, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was. Yeah. And Belvoir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
And Never Did Me Any Harm was, Sydney Theatre Company.
Yeah. Well, lovely to chat with you.
Yeah, it's been great, David.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful to have you at NIDA directing Perfect Stranger recently. So thank you so much for that. Students had a ball.
I love the
audiences too. So
yeah.
Okay.
No, that will remain with me. I would leave the tech rehearsals. It's one thing to be disorientated in the theatre, but I would go home spinning a little bit. Yeah, it was great.
Okay. We must have you back. All right. Thank you so much, Kate.
Thanks, David. And everyone who's listening. Thank you.
Cheerio. Bye.